Are Texas houses really cheaper? Is all that heat worth it? I actually lived in Texas for a year, and in today's video, I'm going to share everything I learned about Texas while I was there. What I liked, and being totally honest here, mostly what I didn't like. It was not for me, and it had only been a few months in Texas before Timothy and I wanted to move back to Raleigh, but it gave me some perspective on why people want to live in Texas. There are some good things, but compared to North Carolina, I think it's no contest. Fair warning, this video is not an unbiased review. Normally, I pride myself on my ability to be objective. I'm super biased about this one though. I love North Carolina, and I would never want to live in Texas. There are other states that I would enjoy living in, and we've even considered moving to other states, but Texas is not on my bucket list of great places to live. Texans love Texas, and I am sure there are going to be a few watching this video. Y'all feel free to stick your objections in the comments. I'd love to hear them. My husband took a job there as the headmaster of a school, and I tagged along with them as I used to do back in those days. And we got to Texas and we found the most recent Texas relocation report showed that 500,000 people moved to Texas in 2019, including 200,000 people from other countries. The capital cities of North Carolina and Texas, Raleigh and Austin, both regularly make the national headlines as growing tech hubs and places for people to relocate to. There's gotta be something good about Texas if so many people are going there. One last caveat before I begin: Texas is huge compared to little old North Carolina. It's like comparing jolly old England and France. North Carolina has 10.7 million people compared to Texas's. How exactly do you say the plural of Texas? Is it Texi, like cactus is cacti? No clue, but Texas's got 29.2 million people. There's a lot of variation in the people, the cultures, and the environments in both states, so yes, I'm generalizing, but North Carolina still wins. Come on, Texans, tell me I'm wrong. First weird thing, almost every article you'll find online about moving to Texas, the #1 thing at the top of the list is it's cheap. That's why people are willing to live in a state with rattlesnakes and cactus where the sun literally tries to cook you. It's cheap. And that is a true story. I was shocked by home prices in Texas when we were there. A home like this in Texas was going for the same price as homes like this in Raleigh. So score #1 for Texas, low prices, just like Walmart. But prices are not all that meets the eye. The houses that I just mentioned, the price might have been lower in the Texas house, but the taxes on that Texas house are $7,437. The taxes on the Raleigh house are $2,285. The Raleigh house is still more expensive, but let's remember that what you pay in the price of the house is part of what you get back when you sell it, plus value increases, or let's be fair, decreases. But come on, life's no fun without a little bit of risk involved. Those tax dollars, come here where you can hear me. I don't want to say this too loud. It's a Ponzi scheme. You're not getting it back. But still, Texas is cheaper, at least in this example, but let's look at a more widespread comparison of the prices in each state. Now, of course, both of these states have huge differences in the various cities across the states, so let's compare the cost of living in the two capital cities first, Raleigh and Austin. Remember, that last house that I showed you was in Houston, which, let's face it, is the armpit of Texas. Austin is more like the weird crown jewel of Texas. You can see that the cost of living in Raleigh is lower in just about every area, with the exception of groceries, which are slightly higher in Raleigh, but these cities are also the most expensive in each of their respective states. So let's compare cost in Charlotte and Dallas, because both of those are larger cities but not the capital. And you can see that Charlotte is cheaper than Dallas by a little bit. Keep in mind that both states have plenty of locations with lower cost of living outside of these large metropolitan areas. So let's talk about the weather. That's a safe topic, right? I grew up in South Florida, so I thought that I understood hot. Newsflash, I didn't. 17 cities in Texas ranked in the top 50 hottest cities in the United States. 34% of the hottest cities in the US are in Texas. Now, when you see maps like this one with high temperatures, keep in mind that they don't include the heat index. Maybe you've heard the term heat index, but you don't really know what it is. Well, let me explain it to you. Humans have this really nifty mechanism to cool down our bodies when we're hot. It's called sweating, or as my family likes to say, schwitzing. It's like our own natural mister system. You get too hot, turn on the waterworks, a little bit of sweat helps keep your body temperature from overheating and, dying of heat stroke. The system doesn't work in Texas. When the air is full of humidity, the sweat can't evaporate off your skin, which is what causes us to cool down. Look at this chart. When it is 110 degrees in Texas and the humidity is 50%, that means it feels like 137 degrees. And if you're wondering whether the humidity gets that high in Texas, it does. Now, when it's 100 degrees outside, the hottest part of your car is going to be about 157 degrees. That's almost as hot as a crock pot on the low setting. Honey, I'm putting dinner in the oven. Dinner is on. Now, North Carolina. It definitely gets hot here as well, but it's no comparison to Texas. You can see here that when a heat wave hit the entire United States, North Carolina was easily 10 degrees cooler than Texas, and honestly cooler than a lot of the country. It's those cool ocean breezes. But this kind of thing rarely happens here in North Carolina. We almost never get over 100 degrees. Here's a summary of the average number of days it gets over 100 in Dallas. On average, there will be 20 days over 100 in Dallas per year. Now, I do want to make a note that in 2011, which happens to be the year that I lived in Texas, there were 79 days over 100 degrees. No wonder I felt like I was being cooked. Now, I couldn't find the same information on the number of days over 100 degrees from the National Weather Service for North Carolina, and I'm guessing that that's because it's very rare for us to get over 100 in North Carolina. We do have hot summers, but even during the summer, it's not too hot to get outside and go hiking. And of course, you can always go to the mountains where it's 10 to 15 degrees cooler. We also have seasons in North Carolina. One of the most stunning parts of the year is leaf season. In North Carolina, from October through November, it starts in the mountains in late September and spreads throughout the state. Most people that live in North Carolina live for this fall leaf season because everything is magical and beautiful. We call the blue sky in our state the Carolina blue for a reason. That stunning blue sky against the striking red, orange, and yellow of fall, it feels like you're driving or walking through a movie set. I expected that the fall colors wouldn't be as vibrant in Texas because you do need some winter temps in order to get that color. What I didn't expect was the dreary gray all winter. I thought it would be more like Florida weather that all the snowbirds come down for. I thought the humidity would drop, the skies would be clear blue, and everyone could get outside and enjoy the more moderate climate. It was cooler, but the humidity stuck around and winter was damp, gray, and dreary. Not much of a trade-off for the long, miserable summer as I had hoped. So the very first thing when we got there, this was like week one, that was just such an illustration of how different it was in Texas from North Carolina. So he, like I said, he took a job as a headmaster of a school, and they were doing some kind of a, school kind of pep rally, first day of school, first week of school thing. And the teachers wanted to take a pig's head, the head of a pig. Texas has no state income tax, so they definitely win in this category, right? Hold on there, partner. The money's got to come from somewhere. As we already saw, Texas has higher property taxes, but also higher sales taxes. While Texas' statewide sales tax rate is a relatively modest 6.25%, total sales tax, including county and city taxes of up to 8.25% are levied. To make matters worse, rates in most major cities reach this limit. Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio all have a combined state and local sales tax rate of 8.25%. According to smartasset.com, property taxes in Texas are among the highest in the country. Effective property tax rates average 1.69%, meaning Texan households pay an average of $3,390 in property taxes each year, which is based on the median home price for the state. And remember, there are tons of little towns very far from urban centers with very low housing prices. But let's not forget that Austin is raking in those tax dollars with their property values skyrocketing like they did in the past year. But is North Carolina any better? Yes, we've got the state income tax here. North Carolina has a flat income tax rate of 5.25%. The property tax rate makes a huge difference in how much house you can afford. North Carolina's property tax rates are relatively low in comparison to those of other states. The average effective property tax rate in North Carolina is 0.77%, well under the national average of 1.07. Our sales taxes are also lower than Texas. The North Carolina state sales tax rate is currently 4.75%. Depending on local municipalities, the total tax rate can be as high as 7.5%. Of course, your individual situation may be different, but I don't think Texas' lack of state income tax would entice me to move back. The biggest thing that I disliked about living in Texas was that no matter how long you drove in your car, you were still in Texas. Most of the people we met in Texas left the state for vacations, and usually they flew somewhere: Colorado, Utah, Florida. Everything was far away in Texas. Texas is 268,000 square miles. North Carolina is 53,000 square miles. In Raleigh, North Carolina, I can drive to mountains and see waterfalls in 2.5 hours. I can be at the beach in 2 hours. I can be in Washington, D.C. or Savannah, Georgia in 4 hours drive, or in 6 hours drive, I can be at the Florida beaches or in Philadelphia. There is so much to do so close by that I almost felt landlocked in Texas, like I couldn't go anywhere. Having said that, I was only in Texas for a year, and I know that there are a lot of fun looking things to do in Texas that I didn't necessarily get to experience. The top 5 things that I think look worth visiting in Texas are the San Antonio Riverwalk. The Space Center in Houston looks really cool. One thing they have in Texas that we don't have in North Carolina is canyons. Big Bend National Park looks fascinating, and I'm not a fan of the scrubby desert type landscape of Texas, and North Carolina is in the top 10 of most densely forested states in the United States. But my brother-in-law, who married a nice Texas girl and moved to Texas, says that over time you get used to and learn to appreciate the stark beauty of Texas. So the parks in Texas are less green and more rocky, but there's definitely a beauty to them. Personally, I'll take the trees. Also, if I were looking for something to do in Texas, I would want to go to a ghost town. This is Terlingua, Texas, which used to be home to 2,000 residents with schools, a hotel, and mail delivery. Also, Texas does have some natural caverns down near San Antonio. In North Carolina, we have Linville Caverns, and there's a lot of gem mining in that area as well, which can be fun. Now, almost every reasonably sized city is going to have some good food in it, and I'm not going to claim that Texas doesn't have good food, but I want to vent a little bit about the grocery situation. Because of the lax zoning and planning, or the lack of planning, that seemed rampant in my Texas experience, going grocery shopping was a real chore. Here in Raleigh, there are grocery stores everywhere. In 5 minutes or less, I can be at several Harris Teeters, a Whole Foods, an Aldi, a Lidl, a Food Lion, or a Wegmans. In 15 minutes, I can be at one of 3 Costco's. But where I was in Texas, there was only one grocery store. And mind you, I wasn't living in the middle of nowhere. I was living in a very densely populated suburban residential area north of Houston, and going to that H-E-B was not a pleasant experience. They say everything in Texas is bigger. That may be true, but it isn't what I wanted for my shopping experience. The H-E-B was monstrous sized. It was overwhelming and loud, very echoey from those high ceilings. It was like being in some indoor bazaar with bright colors everywhere. Here in Raleigh, our grocery stores tend to be smaller, maybe because there's more of them and everybody doesn't have to go to the same ones, and they tend to be tastefully decorated. Some of them even have wine and beer bars in them in case you just want to hang out for a while. I know that seems kind of weird, but it's all about the ambiance in Raleigh. And on the food issue, there's one thing that I've got to admit Texas has North Carolina beat. Raw milk is illegal in North Carolina. People have come up with ways to try and skirt this law, but in Texas, raw milk sales are perfectly legal. I know some of you guys are going to tell me maybe you're thinking that raw milk isn't safe, but in Texas, I could go to a farm stand and buy raw milk, and I really appreciated that. So, okay, Texas loses on the grocery store front, but I appreciate the freedom that they permit in the raw milk world. And that is one of the things that people do really like about Texas so much. There does seem to be a cultural emphasis on independence and personal freedom. I will freely admit that I love that. If I want to risk my life drinking potentially contaminated milk, I don't care for somebody telling me that I'm not allowed to. To be fair, it's perfectly legal to drink raw milk in North Carolina, but it's not legal to sell it. Unfortunately, my neighbors didn't care for the cow I tried to board in my half-acre backyard. Go figure. Take a pig's head, the head of a pig, and they wanted to coat it in mayonnaise, and they wanted to use this pig's head as, I guess, a football or some kind of like it was supposed to be slippery, and I will say that it was the beginning of the demise of his position at that school, because he was an adamant, there will be no pig's heads. There will be no mayonnaise. We are not doing that. That's disgusting. People didn't like that. It didn't go over very well for him, and we didn't last in Texas very long. One of the things that surprised me about living in Texas was the skunks and the wild boars. I know there are skunks all over the country. I've never run into one in the Raleigh area. In Texas, they seem to get hit by cars all the time. And while you're driving to the store, you'd get that, ooh, someone hit a skunk smell. Inconvenient, but not dangerous. But the wild boars roaming the area, they are dangerous. I couldn't believe it when I heard on the news about the wild boar problems in our suburban area. Thank goodness I never saw one. No wonder Texans are locked and loaded. Now, North Carolina does have bears, but I've never personally seen one. Our problems, at least in the cities, are the cute little deer that have a tendency in the spring and fall to jump out in front of your car, and in the summer to eat through your vegetable garden. The bunnies also eat through your veggies too, but they're super cute, so I don't really mind. Speaking of cute, Texas does have armadillos, and I think they're adorable too. People will warn you off North Carolina because of the copperheads and the mosquitoes, but honestly, mosquitoes are manageable, and the copperheads, they're not aggressive. I've seen plenty of them, but they've mostly left me alone. They did mess with my dog once. But Texas has rattlesnakes. We've got them somewhere here in North Carolina too, so they tell me, but again, I've never seen one and I don't know anybody who has, and they surely aren't as common as they are in Texas. Just watch this clip about a nest of rattlesnakes in a Texas crawl space.
Got him. Yep. Oh, he's not so happy. Huh?
Just no. Pretty much anything else I have to say about Texas is overridden by those rattlesnakes. We both have tornadoes, but the Texas ones are bigger. Everything's bigger in Texas. We both have hurricanes, but if a hurricane hits the Texas coast, they get walloped. We don't have any really large cities on our coast, so hurricanes for us are mostly damaging in the flooding rivers that come later. Don't get me wrong, they can wreak havoc for those on the coast and along the waterways, but we don't get whole giant cities underwater like Texas does. The biggest problem I had with living in Texas and being worried about a hurricane is that there's nowhere to go if one's coming. There's only one way out of town, and that's going to be deadlocked because of the higher populations and the really intense traffic, even on a good day. I've ridden out hurricanes in South Florida, and for some reason, they just don't have the impact that they do in Texas.
Think about Matthew McConaughey as the ideal Texan.
Oh, there's something to be said for Matthew McConaughey.
And Andy Griffith as our iconic North Carolinian.
I'm voting Matthew McConaughey all day long. Maybe I do like Texas. If you liked this video, you might also like this one about Raleigh versus Atlanta.